Okay, so with that, I'm introducing Randall Berry. He's the research director for SpectrumX, an NS-funded Spectrum Innovation Research Center. He's also the chair and John A. Dever Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Northwestern University. Has a PhD in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from MIT in 2000. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you.
Is your microphone on?
Is my mic on? Yeah.
Yep. Okay, good enough.
Up a little. All right, thanks. Happy to be here. So this is going to be a little bit of a different talk. I am, as I said, I am the new research director for SpectrumX. This is a large center funded by NSF. I think some of you are familiar. I see some familiar faces. But I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to SpectrumX first. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our current research activities, and hopefully I think some of them may be of interest and things that we can talk more about. So we are a Spectrum Innovation Center. I guess we should say we are the Spectrum Innovation Center so far. We're the only one that's been funded by NSF. As I said, it's a large center. We have 30 member institutions, different universities. You can see some of them on the map there. We have, if you add up the researchers and students and you know, external collaborators, we have around 150 researchers that are involved in this center. So large number of people. We were established in 2021 with a 5-year, $25 million award from NSF. So we're in our 4th year now. And it's a unique partnership, NTIA and the FCC have an agreement with NSF that led to this center. And we also have some additional funding from both the government and industry beyond our initial allocation from NSF. And our goal is to really be the academic hub for radio spectrum research. And by that, what we mean is to not only have a large group of researchers working in the spectrum space, but to connect to lots of the other parts of the spectrum ecosystem, including, you can see WInnForum down at the bottom. So we do have an affiliation with WInnForum. And we try to monitor and stay on top of many of the things that are happening it's a two-way street. I think a lot of academic researchers really benefit from getting exposure to this, keeping their research sort of grounded. And then we also try to, have our research make an impact as well. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we're structured into a bunch of different working groups. I'm the research director. Nick Laneman, who you may know, is the overall director for the center. Monisha is sitting in the front, is our policy outreach director. And then we also do things on education, workforce development, broadening participation, collaboration, facilities and administration. So I'm mainly going to focus on the research aspect today. I have a few slides at the end. If we have time, I can comment on some of the other things if there's interest as well. All right. Just a few examples of what have we done so far, and are in the process of doing. I think these are all things that we're pretty happy with. We are developing advanced spectrum sensing and coexistence experimentation platforms. I'll say more about that a little bit later, but you can see a picture there. So we're doing things from sort of the hardware level to going out and doing experiments, sensing things. But also another feature of the center is it's not just technologists. We have economists and policy researchers involved in the center. And so I think creating a dialogue between those two camps we have been pretty successful with. We have had several academics that are affiliated with the center give congressional testimony, including Monisha is a nice picture there. I mentioned workforce development. We have a series of videos that have just been released that are talking about sort of spectrum Spectrum Science, sort of an introduction for students. So if you want to take a look at those, I believe they're on YouTube. We have an REU, that's a summer program for undergrads doing research. We're in our I think, 3rd year of doing this summer. And we also run a summer school at several of the affiliated universities for graduate students to come and spend a week and learn more about Spectrum. I mentioned some other additional funding. We have collaborations with NTIA. I'll say a little bit more about those later. We have what we call our NTA liaison projects that we're working on. We have a new project that's just getting started with the DoD out of the Future G group there that's looking at a taxonomy of spectrum sharing. So something very, very relevant, I think, here. And we hosted one of the listening sessions for the National Spectrum Strategy. I think that's what that picture is. And then another thing is we've been trying to help convene even larger groups of researchers. So the picture at the bottom left is the NSF Spectrum Week from, I believe that's a 2024 picture. We had over 150 researchers involved in that meeting in DC. We co-located with IEEE DySPAN. There was a lot going on. I think a couple of people here were there that week. So research. So our research has evolved with a center of this size. At least for academics, it took a while to launch, to get things sort of stable. I think we've settled into the following structure. We have 2 flagship projects. I'll talk about both of these in more detail next. So the idea of these were to have very coordinated, structured research that involved a lot of different aspects of the center, all working together under sort of for common goals. So I will have a few slides on both of the flagship projects. We also have what we call research communities, which are looser groups of faculty that are just based on their interests, that meet online once a month, try to talk about what's interesting to them in their areas. So I'll say a little bit more about those too. We have seed projects. We've done 2 rounds of seed funding. So these are smaller 1-year projects. The idea is to have a way for new ideas to bubble up. Sometimes these end up getting integrated into like a flagship. Sometimes these sometimes these lead to a different proposal by the PIs. So we're thinking about doing 1 more round of those over the summer. And then I mentioned the liaisons and supplemental funding that we have as well. All right. So flagships. The first flagship has been going for about a little under a year, so it started pretty much last fall. The theme of this is spectrum awareness. What we want to do is we want to enable next generation sensing, awareness, and understanding at scale. We're focusing on 7 to 8 gigahertz that we just heard about, but the platform we're developing will operate outside of 7 to 8 gigahertz too. And so what does this involve? This involves integrating sensing, data analysis, visualization, AI and ML on the data that's collected, training and field experiments for students, and exploring different coexistence scenarios, developing, again, concepts, capabilities, and infrastructure. And so here's a little bit of the highlights. So the platform that we've developed is, you can see in the top left there, is called the MEP, the Mobile Experiment Platform. It's not small, but this is a mobile platform. You can wheel this out. It has a SDR in it. It also has compute, so it can run AI ML algorithms on the MEP, can do data acquisition. And then you can see beyond that, we're building sort of a pipeline to collect the data, to have ways of storing data that we collect, making it accessible, making it easy for researchers to use that data and apply different algorithms to it. And then we're establishing a set of experiments, based on this that I'll comment on next. Oh. All right. So here are the flagship experiments. In November, when we launched basically the flagship project, we had a student training workshop in November where students from across the center got together and basically helped build the initial map. So we had the parts, we assembled these, and then had the students go out and take measurements and just play around to get used to doing this. We been talking with NTIA around an East Coast propagation experiment. We're also talking with the NSF Powder platform. That's a NSF platform for experimental wireless in Utah, if you're not familiar with. So we're going to do something this summer with them. We're also been talking with the VLA and are planning to do a measurement campaign with the VLA in the summer in July. That's going to be looking at generating 5G waveforms in 7 to 8 gigahertz and seeing what type of interference they create at the VLA. We're planning a student competition with student teams that are going to be looking at data that they get out of this in multiple prize categories. We're also in talks with Hat Creek to be part of their NRDZ experiment in the fall. So that's the National Radio Dynamic Zone. That's another NSF funded project. And then, our goal is sort of in the spring of next year, so a year from now, to have a flagship experiment. We're still working out exactly what that would be, and I'd love to hear if anyone has thoughts on what to do there. All right. This slide I also wanted to show, so a lot of this flagship is what I would say sort of bottom-up building infrastructure for sensing and going out and taking measurements, but we also have a top-down component to this project, which I think very nicely dovetails with some of what we just heard. It's about looking at 7 to 8 gigahertz, trying to think about the incumbents in the band. We just heard about all the different types of incumbents, thinking about potential entrants, both cellular and Wi-Fi, indoor, outdoor usage, and think about different possible coexistence approaches. They might be dynamic sharing, it might be just geographic sharing, right? We've also been doing a little bit of work on what we call beacon-assisted approaches. So thinking about where you might use beacons, say like around a satellite ground station to protect it in a more, where you're not just basing things on propagation models, but you're basing them on actual, measurements of beacon power. Overlay rights is another thing that we've thought about here. So this is more of a policy tool for, allowing a potential entrant to negotiate with an incumbent, to maybe pay them to move a band, to move a fixed link out of a band, or not, right? So that's sort of the top-down part of our flagship, and the goal here is to think about these coexistent frameworks and also to possibly inform experiments that may be done next year using this platform. All right, that's our first flagship. It's been up for, like I said, since for about a year now. The second flagship is just getting started. It took a little bit longer. The theme of this is scientific coexistence in the high frontier. So by the high frontier, we basically mean satellites, in particular, looking at mega constellations and the impact of mega constellations on things like radio astronomy and weather sensing, right? And so what are we planning to do here? There's really sort of 4 different elements that I highlight. We are looking at developing a radio science coexistence simulator, so that will help simulate the impacts from satellite constellations on things like a radio astronomy telescope. We are also trying to then use the outputs of that to understand the impacts on things like weather modeling or astronomy, right? So in there we have people that are going to be funded on this that do both of those things. They're either astronomers or they work on weather modeling. At least they have in the past. We're also going to, again, we have people on the team at like MIT Haystack, so we're going to be looking at collecting data at scientific platforms, including harmonics and unwanted emissions, and trying to think about feeding that into this whole loop of simulations. And then finally, again, we have sort of a top-down thrust here of looking at the scientific rights, incentives, and policy issues around coexistence with science users. And like one question there is what is the role of markets in settings like this where markets haven't typically been used, or is there a role? So that's all I was going to say about the two flagships. Maybe I can pause for a second and then I'll keep going. Any questions?
Randy, does the weather modeling component have any bidirectional aspects for instance, atmospheric ducting? A few years back in 3GPP, we did put in a messaging aspect of pipeline without much use, right? I mean, it's just there.
Right.
Would this have the opportunity to have some sort of bidirectional aspect? We use it for interference between distant base stations.
Right. We haven't thought about that. It's a neat idea, though. I can. Yeah.
So, is it more about the climate itself, or is it also about propagation within turbulent environments and such?
It's about trying to understand that so if you are getting interference to, say, weather radars, what is the impact of that on actual predictions, right? So how would your quality of prediction deteriorate? And how much RFI, can they withstand and still make reasonable predictions, right? That's sort of the other side of it. So you read a lot of some of the discussions around what was it, 24 gigahertz, whereas we're not going to be able to predict anything, right? So we're trying to come at it a little bit more scientifically. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Andy, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. So in the 7 and 8 gigahertz monitoring, maybe I missed it, but is there going to be an attempt to detect and map out federal government operations in the 7 to 8 gigahertz?
We're going to be careful. We're not going to try to map out anything. Probably no DoD. We're probably going to stay away from those. I mean, we are looking at the multi-stakeholder meetings. So if there are cases where there's bands that are the locations known, it may be an interesting case to go and see what we can detect. Right? You're
not going to try to seek out and find the FAA point-to-point links and all that. I mean, that'd be really cool if you did that. Yeah.
We could. I think the FAA, I say DoD is the one I would be hesitant to seek out the links that.
Yeah, they frown upon active ELINT operations.
Right. Yeah. Manisha. Yeah.
Really is the DOE, the Department of Energy links, because we have a separate project, and Tom Willis is aware of it, where we are studying the 6 gigahertz utility links, and there's similar 7 gigahertz links that DOE operates. So that's just in early stages of discussion at this point. Fixed links are going to be really hard to detect if you're on the ground and they're up there. So.
Randy, you wound up here on a very important point, the role of markets.
Yes.
How many economists, how many students that are studying economics at undergrad or grad level working on these programs, how could we start to simulate, market activity as well as develop the technology next door to it?
Yeah. So I mean that is something we've talked about in the first flagship was possibly doing some types of simulated market experiments. There are experimental economists that run these types of things typically in computer labs with undergrads that get paid like a Starbucks gift card or something. But that might be one way to start doing this.
So why don't we move along?
Okay, yeah, I will move on. Let me skip over that. So I did want to say a little bit more about our research communities. So we have 3 research communities. There's one on economics, rights, and policy that talks about exactly those types of issues. We have one that's on technology and measurements, and then one that's on more algorithms and AI ML. These meet, as I said, monthly. One of the things, especially the last one on algorithms, AI, and ML have generated some sort of community vision papers. We had one on data-driven policy that was at DySPAN last year. We're working on one on AI and ML in Spectrum. This is also another place where these groups get briefings on policy activities that are happening. And for new affiliates, both academic as well as industry or government, that this is a sort of entry point. People can join these meetings and hear about what's happening and get involved in those discussions. Our seed projects, as I said, we've done 2 rounds of seed funding. These were the 6 that were funded in the most recent year. So these all just started this past year. You can see, I think it illustrates over the breadth of the center. We have people working on, agile RF front ends with analog and propagation interference suppression. So very, very hardware centric project. We have one that's on operator self-identification for spectrum sharing that's looking at using ideas of like watermarking to be able to try to figure out, who's transmitting in certain bands. One on fault tolerance, Byzantine fault tolerance. One, this is a fun one that's using sort of generative AI ideas to create a chatbot for spectrum-related issues. Something on multispectral transmitter characterization. This is related to the second flagship as well, where Maria is doing work on identifying harmonics for given transmitters. And then finally, we have some work that Manisha's involved in that's looking at making this SIGCAP data platform that she's been using much more scalable and open. So I've heard Manisha talk about some really interesting measurements that come out of that. We are planning another round of these. And again, that's another place where we welcome suggestions. So if there's thoughts on what we should be funding or what encouraging people to propose for seed projects, let me know during the break, perhaps. And I'll mention, so the NTIA with OSM and ITS, we have these liaison projects. I'm involved in one that I can mention. I think it kind of dovetails to some of the things that we just heard about value-based spectrum management. So this was something that was in the National Spectrum Strategy. And the idea here is to come up with a principled framework for thinking about values, not just for commercial, but also for federal uses of spectrum, and use that to influence the decision making. And these values should account for things like, like the cost of build out, like the cost of a sharing mechanism, right? As well as the cost of relocation, if that was possible. Another one I can mention, since Manisha's here, is one on 5G sharing. That's looking at developing a simulation platform to understand coexistence with 5G base stations, accounting for things like different antenna patterns. I won't go through all of them, but I think this has been really great. I think these have been really a nice benefit of the center, is being able to plug into these types of projects. All right, so how am I on time? Should I go over education and stuff or stop?
Yeah, we've been running late on every presentation so far, so maybe take another 10 minutes and.
Okay. All right. I thought it was after 3, so I didn't want to.
Yeah, there's cookies out there that disappear in half an hour. So.
All right. Well, I won't keep you. So I mentioned earlier we have education. What happened to the heading there? Workforce activities. These have involved, everything from like pre-college lessons that we published on this Supernova. It involved, REU students, so 48 different REU undergrad research projects. We have 4 higher ed courses in development. I mentioned one of them was just been released. We've done 4 summer schools and 50 different citizen science kits. For broadening participation, again, we've tried to bring in new members, so 25 new affiliates since we launched the program. Looking at professional assessment, research onboarding of new members to the community. And then this is the one I wanted to get to. So coordination and collaboration activities. We have a external advisory board that we meet with, as well as a collaboration advisory board. So the collaboration advisory board includes some of the companies that you see here. I think some of them are represented in the room. And thank you. So we meet with both of these. So we get a lot of external input, as well as input from NTIA and FCC. And we also try to engage in external working groups like the NextG Alliance or the PATS. And so finally, we do, this is again, one of the things that was I think really different about this Center for Academics was that policy engagement was a priority. And so, that involves things like the congressional testimony I mentioned earlier, but also, tracking regulatory proceedings, filing comments when they're appropriate, and that's not something academics are used to, right? There's trying to, respond to FCC comments, engaging with, speakers and panelists from the policy community, and so, engaging with audiences like this one. I think this is again, something that's really special about this effort. So I'll stop there, so I don't slow us down from the cookies. And
any questions?
Yeah.
All right, I'll ask Andy a question because he sits on the cab for us. What are your thoughts on the way the cab's been working?
So the cab works well. We meet every 2 weeks. We just had a meeting just this last Monday. The purpose is for industry groups to provide feedback on what SpectrumX is doing. And WInnForum, what the arrangement we have is that basically we are members in each other's organization. So by that, we get Manisha participating in WInnForum, and then SpectrumX is on the short end of the stick because they get me participating in the cab. But we get to learn a lot about what each other are doing. And like these seed projects and stuff, that kind of piqued my interest in one of the recent cab meetings. And it might be something for us to think about if we want to have any suggestions of the types of projects they may want to start out. So yeah, I think it's been a very worthwhile collaboration between the two.
Okay. Thanks, Andy.